And welcome back to this Friday edition of FreightWaves. Now I'm Anthony Smith here alongside Thomas Watson. And Thomas, we have a special guest here with us this morning. Of course, it's Friday, so that means we get to have the sharpest dressed man in the supply chain, Steve Ferreira from B2B, Navigate B2B. Steve, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Anthony, good morning. It's great to see you. Hi, Thomas. It's nice to see you.
Pleasure to see you. Diving in real quick here, Expeditors recently suffered a cyber attack. And, we talk about cyber attacks. This one kind of seems like a big deal. What are your thoughts on how this may impact rates moving forward?
Well, the cyber attack is definitely a challenge for the enterprise. It goes without saying, especially when it happens to a market leader like Expeditors. I think that below the surface, it's not just the cyber attack itself on Expeditors, say, internal tracking systems. It also inhibits them or its exterior clients from using, say, order management systems and the ability to book with other carriers. And so it does create kind of a bullwhip or backflow effect, but very similar to some of the other issues going on in Asia. So the compound effect, in my opinion, the cyber attack is one small blip, but the sum of all the parts tend to tend to be on the uptick for the rates rising. And we've seen that last week with the FreightWaves exclusive indices that I'm following, Thomas.
And Steve, when I think of cyber attacks, of course, you mentioned Expeditors and how this can really impact them. But it seems like when you look at imports or international maritime, that there's definitely a lot of areas that cyber attacks could also target. Are there any other areas that you're going to be watching closely or monitoring?
Well, we do see outbreaks, and not to diminish them. The port of Navashiva in India, I believe was hit by somewhat of a limited attack. Certainly, the biggest problem that we as ocean freight experts, maritime experts, fear are cyber attacks on the vessels themselves, sending them into, malicious actor type conditions. So we have to really be cognizant, I think, right now, especially with Russia-Ukraine. And I think Russia-Ukraine, as much as people want to tie it outside of what's happening in ocean rates, I think we have to look at it for the very reasons that you've mentioned and that I've mentioned. I do think Russia-Ukraine adds another couple $100 at least to ocean rates.
I think you bring up a great question about the Russian-Ukraine conflict and how it is causing that instability in rates. Looking at the areas of the Black Sea, Ukraine and that Black Sea region is a very big grain export area as well as minerals. Do you expect a whole lot of volatility in the near term, or how should we approach this if I'm a person trying like a commodities buyer?
Well, it's a great question, Thomas. I think let me just address the container side that we're seeing. So we definitely see an uptick in, say, the China to Europe Trans-Siberian Railroad, cargo moving by rail. It definitely is impacted, and we'll start to see those rates actually really skyrocket. I had on the CEO of Genco Shipping, Mr. John Wobensmith, President and CEO of Genco Shipping. And I asked John, what the exposure was for Genco to Ukraine, Russia, and he thought it was fairly minimal. But I hear what you're saying. There's an awful lot of natural resources. Unfortunately, this is not the planting season or the harvest season in Ukraine. So we'll have to see what remains to be had there. But I can tell you this. It is interesting to see that two of the areas that President Biden had sanctioned in Donetsk and Lugansk, I did a study and I wanted to see how many containers came out of there. You know how many containers came out of that region in the last 12 months? One. So we'll have to see really what happens overall, but that's a kind of a snapshot look at your answer to your question.
And Steve, one of your, I think, patented or trademarked phrases, containergeddon, seems to be exacerbated when we're looking at some of the COVID protocols that's happening in China right now. Can you break that down a little bit for us?
Well, this is just bizarre. This is just crazy. I have it from one of my most excellent sources, trusted sources for 20 years, that one of the biggest problems right now is China's inconsistent policy if a crew member is showing signs of COVID, that vessel's not allowed to dock in China. It has to go to a third country, and it also has to be visited within that third country by somebody from the Chinese embassy or quasi-embassy affiliated staff to make sure that conflict, that condition of COVID is resolved before that vessel is allowed to return to China. Now, I understand that the conditions are a bit different for Chinese flagged vessels. And, it goes without saying that we might see those idiosyncrasies. But I see this as a terrifically huge issue that kind of puts together the dominoes of the next stage of Containergeddon in terms of the delays.
I think that's a great, talking about Containergeddon. I talked about one time Portpocalypse Now and how these impacts of Chinese containers and stuff. I kind of want to get your thoughts on one thing that I'd heard, that it is actually right now cheaper to simply fabricate these shipping containers in China, ship them over to the United States, than it would be to pay the cost to return them. Do you think this is still an ongoing issue, or is it an example of Chinese steel container dumping?
Well, Thomas, you know what I see? I'm going to make a prediction. I'm going to make a prediction that the container leasing companies, where a lot of these new build containers originate from their investment series and third-party investors, we are having a surplus of them. But I do believe that, in my humble opinion, these empty containers will be eventually sold. And I do believe that some enterprising entrepreneurs will use them to improve the housing market, because, as you know, these containers make excellent housing accommodations. So it's going to be really interesting to see some enterprising entrepreneur, I wonder who that could be, buy these containers.
And Steve, can you talk to us a little bit, last thing here, why participants of a West Coast Ocean Freight Conference in the next few days might be stuck holding the bag? What's going on over there?
Well, a couple thousand people just will be flying on all these planes to kind of kibitz about the ocean rates and the ruminations of what's happening in the Trans-Pacific trade. A lot of times at these conferences, the deal is sealed and the ocean freight contract rates are negotiated. It seems to me, based on what I'm hearing, is that you kind of missed the boat if you've not already kind of concluded the bulk of these negotiations. Ocean rates are, in the contract phase, have skyrocketed in a far more heavy increment than BCOs would ever imagine. And the longer you wait, the higher you'll pay and the more expense you'll have to pass on to your customers. So the horse may be out of the barn, and this great shipping conference may just be that, great, without the negotiation component.
I like what you're saying. I hadn't considered that thought, that if you traditionally go to these conferences trying to make a deal, and then now, given how competitive it is for shipping, if you haven't tried to do it way far in advance, you're basically saying that you've missed the boat, metaphorically speaking, in that there's going to be some losers, right?
Well, Thomas, I think, I've been attending these maritime affairs for 25 plus years. And, it's typically, we fall into this kind of, we don't break our paradigm shift very well in maritime. And even though we have so much new blood in container shipping and logistics managers, logistics directors, global VPs of international, we kind of also listen to the piper, right? And that's the ocean vendors themselves. So when they tell us to jump, we kind of still say, well, okay, we get it. How high do you want us to do that? So unfortunately, the best deals, in my expert opinion, to be had would have been 2 and 3 year deals about 3 weeks ago. Now, with participants heading into this conference, they're kind of getting the remains of the volume that the ocean vendors have, unless they're very far along in the negotiation. Now, of course, no one size doesn't fit all. But if it were me having my own retail company or import company, I would have sealed the deal before the traditional mating dance takes place.
And Steve, of course, you have your show here a little bit later on today. Can you give us a quick theme of what you might be talking about this afternoon?
Well, we really want to break down how important the cyber attacks are impacting retailers and beneficial cargo owners. We think we've associated a cost component for the average retailer, so we'll explore that a little bit, and we'll give them some tips and tricks in terms of maybe how to get past this next phase of Containergeddon, Anthony.
Looking forward to it. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Good day, guys. Thank you. Bye.
All right, guys, we're going to take a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more FreightWaves Now.